Her name was Maya Reeves, and she had learned to be invisible. Not the kind of invisible that makes you feel free. The kind that comes from years of making yourself as small as possible so that pain could not find you. She could sit at a dinner table and feel as though she existed on a separate planet, hearing her parents' arguments like distant thunder, close enough to feel the vibration in her chest, far enough to pretend it was not a storm. Maya was 26 years old. She had grown up in Rapid City, South Dakota, in a house that looked perfectly fine from the outside. White shutters. A neat lawn. A mailbox painted the same shade of navy blue as the front door. From the street, no one would have guessed what lived inside those walls. But Maya knew. She had always known. Her father drank. That was the simple version. The fuller version was that her father drank and then became someone else entirely, a man with hot red eyes and a voice that cracked like a whip. He never hit her. She told herself that for years, as though the absence of bruises meant the absence of damage. He never hit her, but he had a way of looking at her that made her feel like she was nothing. Like she had made some great mistake simply by being born. Her mother was kind in the way drowning people are kind, desperately, uselessly, with love that cost too much and saved too little. She braided Maya's hair on Sunday mornings. But when her father's voice rose, her mother became very still, like an animal that has learned movement draws attention. Maya had carried all of this into adulthood like luggage she could not put down. She went to college, studied social work, because somewhere inside her broken self there was a girl who wanted to help people the way no one had helped her. She graduated and got a job at a community center on the edge of the Pine Ridge Reservation, working with at-risk youth. She moved into a small apartment with 2 windows and a leaky faucet and told herself this was the beginning of something new. But beginnings are hard when the past follows you through every door. She couldn't sleep. She lay in bed at night listening to silence and hearing her father's voice inside it. She cried in her car during lunch breaks, sitting in the parking lot with the windows fogged up, crying without knowing exactly why, which was worse than crying for a reason. She smiled at the children she worked with, big practice smiles, and they smiled back, and for a few hours each day she felt almost real. But then she drove home and the apartment closed around her, and the silence came back, and so did the voice. She had tried therapy twice. Both times she talked around the edges of her life, circling the real things without touching them, leaving more hollow than she arrived. The problem was not that she didn't trust therapists. She didn't trust herself. She didn't trust that she was worth the effort. On a Tuesday in October, she sat in her car at the end of her shift and thought, very clearly and quietly, that she was tired of fighting. Not fighting anything specific. Just tired of the daily labor of being herself. Tired of waking up, putting on the armor, walking into the world and pretending she was held together. Then the door to the community center opened and an old man walked into the parking lot. He looked directly at her, through the windshield, and paused. He did not look away. He stood in the cold October air with eyes so still, so steady, so completely without judgment, that something inside Maya cracked open like a fault line shifting beneath the earth. She got out of the car. Her legs carried her toward him without asking her mind for permission. He simply waited, patient as stone, patient as winter. She stood before him and said the only true thing she had said to anyone in months. "I don't know how to keep going," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Wind moved through the dry grass at the edge of the lot. Then he said in a voice low and unhurried, "Then let's start with standing still." Raymond Walk's Farr had buried 3 children. Most people did not know this. It was not something he shared in speeches or wore on the surface of his skin. But it was the deepest fact of his life. His eldest son had died in a car accident at 22. His youngest daughter had lost her battle with addiction at 24. His middle son, the quietest, the one who drew horses in the margins of every notebook, had taken his own life at 19 in the spring, when the reservation was just beginning to turn green after a long and bitter winter. Raymond had not always been the man Maya met in that parking lot. He had been a furious young man, an absent father, a man who drank his grief down in cheap motel rooms while the people who loved him waited at home. He had been the kind of man who knew he was causing damage and caused it anyway because the pain inside him was so loud he could not hear anything else. What turned him around was not a single moment. There was no lightning bolt, no morning when he woke up transformed. There was instead a slow accumulation of choices. There was the morning he drove to the bluffs above the Badlands and sat for 6 hours watching the sky, because his grandmother had told him the sky over Lakota land was the oldest teacher in the world. There was the afternoon he walked into a sweat lodge for the first time in 15 years and wept until his body had nothing left. There was the day he started learning the old stories again, not as history but as medicine, which was what they had always been intended to be. He had become an elder the way rivers become rivers, not by deciding to flow, but by finding the path the land offered and following it deeper over time. That first night he brought Maya inside and made tea. They sat at a folding table under a humming fluorescent light, and he asked her to tell him one true thing about how she felt. She told him she felt like a house where no one lived. He nodded as though he had heard it before, in different words from different mouths, because it was one of the oldest human aches. The Lakota have a phrase, he said. Mitikui oyazaying. It means all my relations. It means you are connected to everything that lives. Every person, every animal, every tree, every stone. You are never separate. The feeling of being a house where no one lives, that is not the truth of who you are. That is what happens when the connection gets buried. Maya looked at her tea. What buries it? Pain buries it. Fear buries it. People who were supposed to protect you and didn't, they bury it too. But buried is not destroyed. Buried is not gone. He did not try to fix her. He asked questions. Some she answered and some she didn't, and he accepted both with equal patience. He asked what she had loved as a child before the world began grinding her down. She said horses and the prairie and drawing maps of imaginary places. He smiled quietly, and she noticed that his eyes were the color of good soil. She came back the next evening and the one after that. Raymond shared stories with her. He told her about White Buffalo Calf Woman, who brought the sacred pipe to the Lakota and taught them to live in right relationship with each other and with the earth. He told her about Wakantanka, the great mystery, so vast no single mind could hold it, yet every open heart could feel it. He told her about his grandmother, a small fierce woman who had survived more suffering than most could imagine and remained soft at her center. Not weak, but soft, the way a willow branch bends without breaking. How did she stay that way? Maya asked one night. Raymond was quiet. Wind moved through the dry grass outside with a sound like breathing. She said you cannot hold grief and gratitude in the same hand, he said. But you can hold them in both hands at once. You have to use both hands. That is the work. Maya turned this over in her mind for days and slowly began to try. November came with a cold that had teeth. Maya was still waking at 3 a.m. Still sitting in her car sometimes, feeling the old hollow feeling spread through her chest like frost on glass. But something was different now. There was a small, stubborn thing inside her, an ember barely there but genuinely there, that had not existed before. She could feel it when she sat across from Raymond and he spoke about the old ways and the understanding that suffering was not a personal failure but a universal experience, one that the Lakota had been developing tools to navigate for thousands of years. Raymond invited her to attend a community healing circle held twice a month at the center. She said yes before she could talk herself out of it. What she found was a circle of plastic chairs in a room smelling of sage and old coffee, occupied by 12 people of varying ages, all carrying something heavy, all there because they had chosen, despite everything, to show up. There was a 16-year-old boy named Thomas who had lost his father to the opioid crisis and lived in a quiet, contained fury. There was Helen, a middle-aged woman who had survived a violent marriage and was slowly learning she deserved to take up space. There was an elderly man, older even than Raymond, who sat with eyes closed but occasionally said something that landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples in every direction. Raymond led the circle with the same groundwater stillness he brought to everything, never rushing, never filling silence because he feared it. He let things breathe. On her third circle Maya spoke. She had not planned to. Raymond opened the space as always, by asking if anyone was carrying something too heavy to carry alone. Maya felt the ember in her chest grow warm, and before her mind could stop her mouth, she was speaking. She said things she had never said aloud, about her father's voice, her mother's silence, the years of making herself small, the leaky faucet, crying in her car without knowing why. She said it in a flat, factual voice, the way you might read a report because it was the only way to get it out without shutting down. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then Thomas, looking at his hands, said, "I do that too. Cry without knowing why. I thought it was just me." Something inside Maya opened that had been shut for a very long time. Raymond spoke about the Lakota understanding of healing. In Western thinking, healing meant going back, undoing the damage. In the Lakota way, healing meant going through. The wound does not disappear. It becomes part of the landscape of who you are. The question is not whether you can erase it. The question is whether you can plant something in it. He spoke about how the Lakota people had survived the breaking of their world, the theft of their land, the destruction of their culture, and carried the old knowledge through every generation. Not survival in the diminished sense of just being alive but being whole. Carrying the fire forward even when the wind was trying to put it out. That capacity is already built into you, he told Maya one quiet evening after the circle ended. The ability to carry fire in a storm. You may not feel it right now. But it was put there before you were born, by everyone who came before you and chose to continue. Maya thought about her mother braiding her hair on Sunday mornings. The patience in those hands. Love that had not been enough but had been real, imperfect and present and trying. She thought about her own daily choice to show up for children carrying more than they should, to be the steady, reliable presence of someone who doesn't leave. She started keeping a journal, not because Raymond told her to, but because the words needed somewhere to go outside her own skull. She wrote badly and honestly, without grammar or structure, the way water finds its way downhill. She also started running. Early mornings, before the dark had lifted, along the road beside the reservation. Her lungs burned. Her legs ached. She felt completely alive inside her own body, and realized with a small shock of recognition, that she had forgotten this was possible. January arrived hard and bone-white. Raymond told Maya on a Thursday evening in the new year that there was something he wanted to offer her. Not a gift exactly. More like an invitation. He explained it carefully and without pressure because he understood, with that deep and quiet intelligence of his, that trust is a door that can only be opened from the inside. He was part of a group that conducted traditional Lakota healing ceremonies. Not performances. Real ceremonies, passed down through generations who understood that the human spirit requires more than medicine and more than talk to fully heal. With the blessing of the other elders, he was inviting her to participate in an inipi, a purification ceremony, what some people called a sweat lodge. He told her what it involved. He told her she could say no, and that no was a complete answer. She said yes without hesitation or regret. The ceremony was held on a Saturday at the end of January, at a site on the reservation that Raymond's family had used for generations. Maya drove out in the early morning dark, following his truck along roads she did not know, through a landscape that looked like the surface of the moon under a winter sky full of stars. She was frightened in the way you are frightened before something that truly matters, not panicked, not retreating, but utterly alert in every nerve, present in every cell. There were 8 people at the ceremony. Raymond, 3 other elders, 2 young men from the community center, Helen from the healing circle, and Maya. They gathered around a fire burning since before dawn, tending the stones that would carry heat into the lodge. Raymond's nephew Joseph, a quiet man of about 40, was the firekeeper, and he worked with a focused, unhurried care that Maya had come to recognize as a distinctly Lakota quality, the understanding that sacred things deserve your full attention. Before the ceremony began, Raymond spoke about its purpose. The inipi was about releasing what no longer served the spirit and inviting clarity, connection, and renewal. The darkness inside the lodge represented the womb, the earth, the night before dawn, and the steam rising from the stones was the breath of the ancestors. Whatever happened inside, tears, anger, silence, or nothing at all, was exactly right. There was no performance required. Only presence. Inside the lodge it was completely dark, very hot, and very close. Maya sat in the circle of bodies and breathed and felt the steam enter her lungs and felt the sweat break across her skin. She understood, with perfect and sudden clarity, that she was in the presence of something much older and larger than herself. She did not have a vision. She did not hear voices. What she had was simpler and more complete than either of those things. She cried. She cried in the way she had been unable to cry for years, fully from the very bottom of herself without holding anything back. Without the careful management of emotion she had practiced since childhood. She cried for her mother, and even in a complicated, unexpected way for her father, not forgiving him but grieving the waste of him, the way someone who had been hurt himself turned around and hurt his daughter with the same careless damage. She cried for every hollow lunch break in every foggy car and all those years of silent endurance. And then, at a point she could not precisely locate, the crying changed. It did not stop, it shifted quality. Less like drowning and more like rain. She felt it move through her and past her, and she felt herself, very quietly, let some of it go. When they emerged into the cold, white silence of the January morning, the world looked different to Maya. The sky was the same sky. The frozen grass was the same grass. But everything seemed more fully present, as though someone had cleaned a window she hadn't known was dirty. Raymond handed her a cup of water and said nothing. His eyes were warm and unsurprised. She understood he had known this was coming long before she did. "What do I do now?" she asked. He looked out at the frozen landscape, at the smoke rising from the fire, at the vast pale sky. "You already know," he said. "You have already started." Spring came late to South Dakota that year, but when it came with force. Maya noticed it the way she had been learning to notice everything, fully with her whole attention. The frozen ground softened and darkened. The dry grass showed its first pale threads of green. Mornings began to smell like something living, pushing up toward light with the blind, relentless determination of things that are meant to grow. She was different. Not healed in the way she had once imagined, not washed clean. But different in a way more durable than that. The wound was not a flaw. The years of surviving her father's voice and her mother's silence had not broken her. They had, in the way suffering works when it doesn't kill you, also built her. She continued meeting with Raymond every week, moving through a landscape he had taught her to see differently, not as empty land but as inhabited land, every hill and creek carrying names and histories that stretched back further than any border. She had attended 4 more healing circles, getting better at speaking each time, the way you improve at anything important by doing it despite the discomfort. She spoke to Carol, the director, about incorporating elements of Lakota healing philosophy into the youth programming. Not appropriating it, Raymond had been clear about the distinction, but giving young people access to the same understanding that had changed her own life. The idea that connection is the antidote to pain. That suffering does not make you broken. That a wound can become a place where something new grows. Carol said yes. Raymond came in once a week to share stories with the youth group. Thomas, the 16-year-old with the contained fury, became Maya's shadow at the sessions. She watched him listen with the hungry attention of someone finally hearing what they have long needed to hear. She recognized that look. She had worn it herself. There was an afternoon in early April when she sat on the back steps, watching new light fall across the grass, and became aware of a feeling so unfamiliar it took several moments to name it. Something like rightness. Like something held wrong for a long time finally being held correctly. The settling of a weight carried crooked, and the extraordinary relief of simply being upright. She was not healed. She still woke at 3 sometimes and the voice still spoke, though quieter now, and she had tools to answer it. She would carry the weight of her childhood for the rest of her life. That was the truth of being human. You carry what happened to you, and the question is whether you are strong enough to carry it without being permanently bent out of shape. Raymond had told her that in the Lakota tradition, those who had suffered the most often became the healers, not despite their suffering but because of it. Because they understood pain from the inside. Because the wound, when it heals, becomes a map of where others might find their way through. She thought about that often, sitting with young people broken open by things they hadn't chosen. She thought about what it meant to be present for them, not as someone who had arrived from outside with answers, but as someone who had come through something real and was still standing. On the last Thursday of April, she arrived to find Raymond already at their folding table, 2 cups of tea made. He looked up when she came in, his eyes warm and quiet and exactly the same as they had been that October evening in the parking lot. She sat down and wrapped her hands around the cup. Outside, the South Dakota sky was doing what it always did, filling itself from horizon to horizon with a light so vast and clear it seemed less like weather and more like a promise. "You look different," Raymond said. She thought about the parking lot, the healing circle, the sweat lodge, and the ember in her chest that was no longer an ember but a steady, actual flame. "I think I'm learning to be here," she said. Raymond looked at her over his cup, those eyes that had seen the full length of a difficult life and had come out the other side not bitter, not hard, but permanently open. "That," he said, "is everything." And she believed him.